Hello, EN 101. Lace up those long distance running shoes. This mini lesson's probably going to be a pretty lengthy one, but let me make a case. For most of you, you're going to get your money's worth out of the second half, where you're going to get to see the actual directions for the first major essay for the semester. And the first half, I'm going to review some vocab, and I want to add at least 2 new official vocab terms. So make sure by the end of that first half, you've got abstraction loop as separate from the term abstract. I want those having separate entries in your notes so that if there was a quiz question on one but not the other, you'd be able to make a distinction. And the word nuance. That's one of those words that I pick for a class like this because it's mappable onto any other topic, conversation, genre, political discussion. So getting to know that term inside and out, the term nuance, that actually is very helpful and mappable out in the larger world, not just in an English class. All right, let's just get into some vocab immediately. I want to talk about the concept of an abstraction loop because for an essay like this, the most common struggle or the most common challenge that many students are going to have is that music is very abstract. If you did the homework and you had to deal with that quote, writing about music is like dancing about architecture, part of the point of that quote is to say how helpless and how hopeless it is to write about music because music is so abstract. Language serves one function, music serves a different one. They're kind of on 2 different planets. So for instance, writing an essay about music is going to be very challenging. So let me give you 1 or 2 pointers using the abstraction loop so you can kind of see common mistakes to avoid for this first essay. So I'm going to give you the definition first. This is one of those cases where the definition may or may not be helpful because I think it's fair to say the definition itself is also abstract. But if you just wrote down for the quiz that an abstraction loop is when you only support an assertion or a generalization with more generalizations, right? So if you only are repeating a recursive process of abstraction upon abstraction, then you're guilty of the abstraction loop. Again, the example may have it make more sense. I'm going to have you add this to the definition just because maybe the physicalization will remind you. Make a physical circle in your notes and make it turn into a little frowny face just to remind you that that's the most common C student problem. If you're only getting like D's and C's on this first essay, it often is because you are falling victim to the abstraction loop. So that definition may or may not have scanned, it may or may not make sense to you, but the example will probably scan a little bit better. In my freshman class, like EN 100, back when it was a seated class, one of the in-class writing assignments is I would give students 10 minutes with this simple task. Tell me a favorite genre of music and then try to make your case as to why you like it. Genre in this case just means category of music, so rock, pop rock, top 40, Australian didgeridoo music. Those are all different genres of music. So some students will probably start with something like rock music. I think rock music is my favorite. English teacher asks for a follow-up. Well, why is rock music your favorite? And the student might say something like, I like it because it's the kind of music I can dance to. And I say, why do you like to dance to it? And you say, because it has a good beat. And I say, what do you like about the beat? And you say, it's the kind of music that I like, so I like beats like that, and that's why I like it. That's the most common example of an abstraction loop, and it's really easy to fall into that with music, because a lot of times we don't know why we like what we like, but it's not just because you have good taste. My guess is that you don't have as much Australian didgeridoo music in your playlist as you might top 40 rock or hip hop and R&B or country and western music. You have a favorite, but there's reasons why it's your favorite. So you want to acknowledge that just saying you like it because you like it, and you like beats like that, and the fact that I like beats like that is why I like to dance to it, and that's why I like music like that. That's you being trapped in the rut of the abstraction loop, where you're basically just piling one generalization on top of each other, but not adding any concrete details or examples. So since I'm telling you in advance that the challenge of the essay is that music by nature is very abstract and very open-ended, could mean different things to different people, keep in mind that you always want to try to make things more concrete where possible. If it's concrete, it feels more real. It has a sense of literally being part of reality. One easy way to do that is with lyrics. If the lyrics of the song matter, as soon as you quote the lyrics, you're being more concrete. You're not just saying, I like it because I like music like that. You're talking about the message, the philosophy of the song, if the song has any social commentary built into it. So lyrics are a gimme. On this first essay, once you see the full set of directions, assume anytime you can quote a song directly through the lyrics, through the words of the song, immediately you're going to get points for concreteness. You're making things more definite and more real by mentioning those quotes. This gets me to the other way you can get more concrete, not just in terms of talking about lyrics, but by trying to demonstrate nuance. So this is the last new vocab term for this mini lesson, and I'll try to use it enough in context so you're getting a sense of how it applies to the essay itself. But for now, just write down as a definition for nuance: once you know enough about a topic, you're able to make subtle distinctions rather than overgeneralizations. So here's what that means. If you're an artist, then you probably have a better sense of color and like noticing subtle distinctions. So if I saw two paint splotches, one was eggshell and the other one was white ochre, I would say they're both white. I don't see any difference or distinction. The more expertise you might have in thinking about color, the more you're able to make those subtle distinctions. So it is a way to be more concrete through being more specific, and as you're doing that, you're showing that you have some expertise in a field. My favorite example from EN 100 of nuance: I'm an arachnophobic. I hate spiders. I'm like viscerally turned off by them, but also kind of fascinated at the same time. So correct this statement: I hate spiders because they're my least favorite insect. Now, if you don't know anything, and why would I care to because I hate them, there's nothing wrong with that. You wouldn't recognize the distinction. If you are an expert in insect studies, forget the official term for it, you might say to yourself, well, technically that's wrong, Vote, because a spider is an arachnid, not an insect. Insects have 6 legs, spiders have 4 legs, so they have a different genus, different taxonomic designation. So you're doing two things. You're annoying me by taking away from my point, but you're also showing expertise. You're showing you're able to make a subtle distinction that somebody who's not an expert in that field might make. Music genres is an easy way to make that point. The more you know about a specific genre, the more nuanced you might be in your discussion. So imagine the same scenario I gave you earlier. We're in EN 100. I tell you, write about your favorite genre of music and try to explain why. If you just start with something most basic, like rock, that's the most general and the least nuanced. So it's very abstract, it's very open-ended, and it could cover anything from Bill Haley and the Comets in the 1950s up through postmodern grunge Seattle scene and everything in between. In other words, it's too general to really mean anything. It's too abstract to be helpful. So think of these two lines as a continuum of specificity or a continuum of nuance. In other words, as you move further right along the line, you're getting more specific, therefore more nuanced, and therefore you're showing a higher level of expertise. So you start with rock, and then you say, well, electronic rock in particular appeals to me. A little bit more specific, a little bit less general. Then you get to slow jam electronic rock, more specific still, therefore more nuanced. And the ultimate end to that might be something like slow jam synthwave chill step, very specific, almost to the point of being esoteric, and chances are only people who are really steeped in that world would know what you mean. Somebody who is not an expert in that genre isn't going to have the jargon or the language. They won't know the terminology to have that level of nuance. Another way to think of nuance is it's the opposite of generalizations, and so it's kind of the antidote to broad generalizations that often display a lack of intelligence. Since I'm saying nuance shows expertise, overgeneralization shows ignorance. That should be obvious to you if you know anybody who likes to generalize about groups of people. Everybody who's this color acts this way, or everybody who has this religion acts that way. That's not only a failure of specificity, it is essentially a complete lack of nuance. It's black and white thinking. So you got nuance on one end, where you're being very specific, very careful, and you're showing that you know a lot about a topic. And the opposite of that is everything that's like this is like that. The black and white thinking, the willingness to overgeneralize, and of course that's where you get stereotypes and full-on prejudice. I would argue prejudice is sort of the ultimate failure of nuance. Or put another way, ignorance is the opposite of nuance. Okay, so before we actually look at the essay directions to try to put all of those terms together in a cohesive whole so you see how I'm applying them to the essay, if you want an A on the first essay, you have to break out of the abstraction loop. That's difficult because music tends to invite abstractions like I like it because it's good and it's good because I like music like that. And that involves being more specific, it involves being more concrete, and the extension of that is it involves being more nuanced. The more specific and concrete you are, the less ignorant you sound, the more nuanced you'll be, and that's how you're going to get into some higher level critical thinking, is making those subtle distinctions. All right, here comes the actual essay directions. If you want to take a break right now, go do some yoga and some deep breathing, take a walk around the block. I know I'm going to. I'm completely lying, by the way. If I had enough time to take a walk around the block and do my yoga, I hope by Thanksgiving there's enough time, enough minutes in my day for those kinds of luxuries. So here it is, the actual directions for the first major essay of the semester. A couple points to make at the beginning. We'll talk about the quiz that'll be associated with this unit. There's 3 units and 3 quizzes. Don't forget the quizzes are literally 10 points each. So you want to make sure you've got a good basic definition for your terms. The essays are 100 points. So literally the quiz is 1/10 of the essay. The essays we're going to show not just memorization of the terms, but understanding and application. So I'm deliberately weighting the essays significantly more because that's where you want to show off. You don't just have a short flashcard definition memorized for the quiz. You have a close enough understanding or a deep enough understanding of the terminology to apply it in action. So here it is, the music in action essay. It's just as unhelpful for me as it is for you if I read through this word for word, but let me try to give you a brief summary, particularly when it comes to breaking out of the abstraction loop and nuance in reference to the overall description. So if you had me for EN 100, we did something like the soundtrack to your life essay. And there's a similar challenge involved with that, in that you're trying to take music, which is pretty squishy and abstract, and somehow drill down and make it more concrete. If you want an easy comparison, what is this essay like compared to that essay from EN 100? You could say the EN 100 essay was essentially, what does music mean to me? Or why do I like certain kinds of music? And you just try to figure out how to create supporting evidence for that. Think of this as the sophisticated older sister version of that assignment. We have the same challenge, but instead of what does music mean to me, you're trying to plug music into either culture or society. So how music activates or how music exists in society or interacts with culture or perpetuates culture. I'm going to give you some specific examples, but that's the main difference. First essay from EN 100 was Music and Me, and this essay is more about music and culture or music and society. So this is a COVID adjustment. Normally I wouldn't go into this much detail or kind of give you these options as paths to pursue, but since we're trying to do this online, I wanted to make it obvious that there's 4 or 5 main ways you could approach this essay and be pretty specific about how you'd pursue those and how you might be able to pick one that fits with your own temperament or that seems easiest or most appropriate to you. So let me walk you through the options. You can mix and match these, by the way, so you might borrow from one and combine it with another. In fact, I like that. It probably means you're making lateral connections across topics. But think of these as kind of main paths that you could pursue. Any one of them is as equal to, or is equally likely to get you an A as any other one, but I do want to make a case about which ones are my favorite. For instance, this first one here I designed and put it at the top because it's not that it's the most likely to succeed, but it's pretty easy to research. So you're not going to spend a lot of time online like hunting through information. It's more about the connections that you want to explore and that just seem interesting to you. So for instance, if you didn't know, country and western music got its twang because the Scottish and Irish immigrants brought all of their stringed instruments from their Gaelic traditions over, and that's where country and western music gets its twang from. You can get an entire essay out of that. I picked that topic because somebody else wrote that topic and got a full A out of it, as did they get an A by figuring out that kind of sweet spot early to mid 90s West Coast gangster rap. If you're aware of that as part of the American mythology of hip hop, you understand how important that movement was. That never would have happened if you didn't get kind of the the East Coast hard bop jazz mixed with Jamaican rocksteady, which is a precursor to reggae music and dance music. dance hall traditions from the Caribbean. And if those two kinds of music hadn't merged and gotten together and had an offspring, we probably never would have gotten the incarnations of hip hop and R&B that we think of as totally normal and mainstream today. If those two grandparents didn't meet, we wouldn't have ended up with most of popular American music on the hip hop and R&B side. In other words, most American music, and I would go as far as to say all American music, is related if you think of it as a family tree. And eventually I want to spend maybe an entire mini lesson showing you one or two websites. One of them is called musicmap.com. Musicmap.com gets you the family tree of American music. It's incredibly nuanced. If you're a music nerd like me, you could spend hours just finding out things like that ska music has these kind of ancient Celtic traditions that you never would have found out otherwise. And when I say the research wouldn't be that difficult, I'm going to give you some websites. You can find a few additional ones on your own or a few YouTube videos. And so the point of this would be pick a few songs, either from one genre of music or a variety, and kind of trace the family tree. Where did that genre of music come from? Try to carry it back as far as you can. And most genres of music in America, you can get to well before the founding of America. It will take you back to Africa, it will take you back to Europe, it will take you to the West Indies and some of the Caribbean influences. And so much of our music is an amalgamation. Any one genre could create a really interesting paper where you're just looking at the family lineage. Here's what the genre looks like today, and here's where it came from, with some examples and some lightweight internet research. So that gets a smiley face just because I know it's pretty easy to research. It tends to be interesting, and you might actually learn something that is interesting to you personally. Option number 2, also a great option. I'm not suggesting I prefer option 1 to option 2. In fact, there are certain groups of you where option 2 might be preferable. It might be easier for you to get an A. For instance, if you're not a native to the United States and you came here late enough in life that you remember your home country, or a variety of home countries if you moved around a lot, that's a perfect opportunity for an essay, because that's a simple compare and contrast. I came from this country originally. My parents and I moved here when I was 15, and I was exposed to an entirely different kind of music. Do some compare, some contrast, talk about music and how it associates with culture or traditions or some of the societal values from your original state, and then talk about what you learned about American music coming here. Alternately, if you're an American citizen, you were born here, but you spent anything more than a few weeks in another country, you can do the exact same paper in reverse. Here's some music genres I liked or that I associated with my hometown or where I came from or my neighborhood, and then compare that to the music from another region. So this is about geography, it's about regionality. You can do physical locations, you can do city mouse versus country mouse. That's what I mean by urban versus rural. You only have to drive from the inner city of Buffalo about an hour and a half south and you get a whole different style of music, and you're only driving an hour and a half and you're immersed in a completely different world. That would get you a pretty interesting essay as well. Option 3, let me make a caveat about option 3. It's potentially the easiest. In a way, it's the most straightforward. So that asterisk means it might be a fallback. It might be an easy essay if all other things being equal, you don't really care what kind of a topic you pick. That might be the shortest distance between, I forgot there was an even essay, I forgot that there was an essay due tomorrow, and I at least want to get a C or better. This could get you there the soonest, because in a way, it's the most straightforward. It's also the easiest to plagiarize, and I'm telling you that not to tempt you to plagiarize, but so that you know if you look up this social commentary and music essay, you will get thousands online. So the temptation is going to be higher to copy paste an entire essay. That's why you're submitting through Blackboard. So definitely don't do that. Don't do that. But this is an obvious one. We're looking at music and social commentary. So anytime a genre of music grows up in response, and usually in a critical response to a negative social trend, to something frightening happening in the culture, to some larger societal oppression. This has happened time and time again. The protest music kind of grows up naturally from the grassroots, then it becomes very popular, and then people figure out you can make money with how popular the protest music, and then it becomes mainstream. And then you need a new protest music that is a response to that mainstream music. So that cycle's been happening, I would argue, since at least the 1920s. There's an argument to be made it's been happening since Europe, right? That was brought over as part of a lot of the transitions and transmigrations, and let's just say it, illegal transplants of humans from those continents to this continent. So you can decide what kind of a lens you want to approach. So it could be a pretty straightforward essay. The danger is that it's been written a lot, so you'd have to decide if you think you can cover enough new ground to make it worth approaching. Music therapy essay. This is because I went to Fredonia as a music major before I flunked out horribly as a music major because I don't do theory. And if any of you do, you can certainly write a theory essay. That would go under the wildcard essay option. But this is because I didn't really realize till I went to school that there's a lot of neurological magic happening with music. So you say, I like music because it's good and it makes me feel good, but there's a lot else going on. Music is a little different than language. It's a little different than when you just talk to somebody out loud. It's a little bit different than reading. It fires some different nerve endings. It creates some new neural pathways through neuroplasticity. So if you want, you can literally talk about the healing power of music. So you can mention some of these neurological studies. You can talk about music therapy. You can talk about Alzheimer's. You can talk about how music, if played for a patient recovering from chemotherapy, it seems like they recover 22% faster on average based on the kind of music that you're playing. So there's some weird, interesting healing effects that music has. That's a little more feel-good, it's a little more squishy. I love it because I believe that it is true and have done enough research to be confident that it's true. But that would give you a very positive essay. That's kind of the kumbaya essay. Sitting in a drum circle and having a communal experience actually is creating some interesting chemistry experiments in your brain on a neurological level. And my favorite, the reason I say it's my favorite is I'm rooting for people to be original and be creative. So if you can create a completely from scratch topic, it might involve pieces of those other options. I'm always rooting for that. I'm not saying I'm immediately giving you more points, but I would say you definitely have an advantage if you present a completely original topic that I haven't thought of or that's a new twist on a familiar topic. Just to let you know what people have gotten A's on the past. An anthropological look at the origins of music. That's literally saying at what point in human evolution did music pop into the scene? Cave paintings looks like hundreds of thousands of years probably, but music and that kind of the oral tradition around music may be even older than cave paintings. That's very difficult to research. It's a lot of open-ended, mysterious questions that can't be answered. Therefore, very abstract and gives you an opportunity to try to dig in. This is a neat one I wouldn't have thought of, but somebody else did. Tracing the evolution of video game soundtracks. So starting with the super analog Mario Brothers soundtrack. Look that up if you don't know how adorably, weirdly catchy it is, even though it's the simplest, most analog tune you could ever imagine. And now that video games are getting more movie-like, they're getting more narrative, they're getting more sophisticated, they're actually hiring people from cinema, right? People who would write soundtracks for big-budget Hollywood movies to write for video games. This person just used that as a way to kind of trace music through time and talk about its effect on culture. This is a tough one, but it actually fits with our last unit, which is literature. When we start talking about literature and storytelling, unfortunately, you'll see a pattern, which a lot of us have seen, which is that artists, and maybe in particular lyricists and poets, often tend to be pretty unstable or likely to be self-destructive or have certain problems with alcohol and other substances. Kind of the non-traditional lifestyle of the rock star. That's the cliche, the rock star who just wipes out a hotel room and ends up, breaking his leg trying to jump into the pool and missing. So it's a cliche, it's a stereotype cliche, but it also seems like it's true a lot of the time, where an artist who has this genius in the creative realm also is very dysfunctional in their daily lives. That's worth digging into, especially since we'll talk about it again when we get to the end of the semester. Is there something about creativity and dysfunctionality that kind of creates that persona or that personality type? Plenty of exceptions to that rule. There's plenty of brilliant artists who are not dysfunctional monsters, but there's also quite a few of the dysfunctional ones. If you feel like you want to dig into that, feel free. Had quite a few papers, and I think you know who you are. This is the female student who learned to dance before she could walk. Dancing is part of her identity, part of her life. It is more essential to her than language, and so she, rather than talking as much about music, would rather talk about dance, which in its own way is a kind of music, and clearly they go together. A lot of good essays that could grow out of that essential connection, and other things like coevolution of music and fashion. if you think of these terms, punk, geezer, gangsta with an A, it has to have an A, hillbilly, and hipster. You say, what do those terms have in common? They're all cultural stereotypes. I could show you like a wardrobe for each of those types, and you could probably match the wardrobe with the genre of music. This is what the geezer would listen to. He's an old person. This sounds like old person music. Here's the country and western twang you were talking about, and here's the hillbilly outfit. Those seem like they would go together. So there's this strong connection between fashion, personality, who you hang out with, and music. And a lot of times those reinforce each other. A lot of good essays to be had trying to grow out of those connections as well. Okay, coming up on the home stretch here. Anytime I give an essay, I try to be pretty explicit about bare bones grading criteria. There's two ways you could interpret that list. One way is, if I've met these minimum criteria, I've met these basic standards, it doesn't guarantee that you're going to pass, but there's a good chance you're going to pass. So if you've met minimums like it has a title on it, you put your thesis in boldface type in the intro paragraph, anytime you quote from the song's lyrics directly or any research that you do, just throw quote marks around them. By the way, no worries about MLA in-text citation for this essay. Any research that you do, tell me about. I call that the conversational citation. I was reading Rolling Stone magazine, and it made the point that 1920s blues affected West Coast jazz more than I thought that it did. So that's all I need. I don't need an in-text citation at this point. We'll get into MLA. But you put quotes around the word-for-word excerpts that you took from another source, and you let me know somewhere what that source was. Other basics, 4 to 6 pages in length. Let me translate that for two groups. For the A students, you should probably get into at least 5 or 6 pages. That would be the sweet spot, Goldilocks zone. Make sure you get to the end of the 4th page if you want to pass. So for the students who are in the C contract negotiation, make sure you get to the end of the 4th page. But Mr. Vogt, I say what I mean and I get right to the point. Two things to say to that. One is probably not. It's a failure of nuance if you think so. And the whole idea here isn't to prove one point, it's to see how far you can get in developing an idea. Another way to translate that would be, is it going to get a better grade just because it's longer? Not necessarily, but the longer it is, the more space you have to experiment, the more likely you are to have tripped into some good observations, and the more chances I have to see you grappling with a difficult idea. So longer doesn't make it better. A 10-page essay isn't twice as good as a 5-page essay, but a 6-page essay, rather than a 4-page essay, has 2 extra pages of exploration, trying to figure out how to deal with complicated abstract thoughts. It's you really attempting to push yourself past that first yoga stretch and really wrap your brain around some more complex and abstract issues. So longer is not better by definition, but it usually implies more development. And if you want to go for the A, you should assume development is really important. The usuals, 12-point font, 1-inch margins. Don't be weird with font. I don't care if it's Times New Roman or Courier, but I did get an entire paper in Wingdings. That's a failure of proofreading if you didn't look at your paper long enough to know that it was in Wingdings. By the way, no worries about headings. If I didn't mention it, as long as your name is on there and you got an original title, that's good enough for me. I'm not going to be grading you on the MLA title page or headings and which side of the paper you put the name and date on. As long as your name's there and you have an original title, you're good to go. This is just my way of describing organization. Your ideas flow smoothly. If you pull away from your main thesis, whatever that is, it's obvious that you're going to come back to it, so I don't feel a digression or tangent that pulls you completely away from where you started your paper. And I'm going to require for this essay first-person exploratory tone. So here's what I mean by that. You have to use I in the paper because I'm grading you on your thoughts. Essentially what that means is the grade comes out of how well you can take complicated, slippery, abstract issues like music and culture, and how well can you dig into them and show off that higher level abstract thinking, but with concrete examples. So here's what the first person voice is. Don't think of it as you proving a point. Think of it as you showing off that you're stretching and you're trying to outsmart yourself. So I'm not interested in you having one main point that you prove. Anybody can write that paper. You already wrote that paper in high school. What I'm looking for is, can you take a variety of complex ideas, tie them together, and maybe build some of your new observations, thoughts that you haven't had before that are more innovative, more creative, outside the box in nature. That's even if they're wrong. So I would give you more points if you made an incorrect observation, but you used that exploratory voice. I might be wrong, but I wonder if the artist, when they used this quote here, if they were suggesting that. That's fine. I'm looking for that tentative but exploratory tone as opposed to a certain conviction. We'll have another essay for those of you that like to be right and want to prove a point and be as persuasive and manipulative as possible. There'll be time for that. But for now, for this essay, think of it as exploratory. You're trying to show off that you can grapple with complicated ideas and get to that next level of complex thinking. Finally, to end us out, everybody's least favorite part, the actual due dates. Let me walk you through these dates, and it should be obvious what they mean, but in case it's not, October 1st, the quiz will be available. The quiz is 10 questions, it's 10 points. It'll be something like you have 20 minutes to complete the quiz, so you got roughly 2 minutes per question. And what I'm looking for there is, do you have that basic definition memorized enough so that if you're scanning a word problem, you can pick out key vocab terminology and associate it with the correct term. So for instance, with concrete, I said concrete has to be something that exists in the real world and you can perceive it through the 5 senses. So you'd skim the word problem, you'd say, oh, exists in the real world, and you'd see the phrase 5 senses, and even if you weren't reading the scenario, you could immediately skim down and get the correct answer on the multiple choice. So look for that to be available for 48 hours from 12:01 Thursday, so that would be Thursday morning, to midnight on Friday, the following Friday. So you have that window to do the quiz whenever you want. Do it once, send it in a Blackboard, that's it. Don't forget that's 10 points as compared to the 100 points of the actual essay. Speaking of points, I don't do a lot with extra credit, but there'll be kind of small piecemeal opportunities for extra credit. And for this first paper, I'd love it if I got papers early. It makes my job easier. I can pace my grading a little bit more effectively and humanely over a longer period. So I'm going to offer 5 points of extra credit for anybody that gets me a final copy in Blackboard by October 7th. That'll be midnight on the 7th if you're pushing it to the deadline. And what that means is hopefully I get some papers early. That's separate from drafts and topic proposals. You can submit those to me anytime starting tomorrow, or you can watch this video and say, ooh, it gives me an idea. Wonder if I can talk about the Rolling Stones' Sympathy for the Devil and whether or not it's actually a Satan worship tune. Is that a viable topic? Send an email off. Chances are I'll say yes. Like I said, I like open topics. Final deadline, this is the actual guillotine drop. It's going to be midnight, October 9th. We'll accept late papers after that, but the syllabus explains that it's pretty aggressive in terms of the grade reduction half-life. Every 24-hour period, the grade goes down significantly. So extra points if you can get me the essay early. Full credit if I get the essay by midnight, for full credit on October 9th. That was a lot. If I'm sick of the sound of my own voice, I can only imagine how you feel. But thanks for sticking it out. As always, email me with questions. Tell me anything you can, or ask me anything you can to make this less intimidating or less anxiety-provoking for you. It's about music, it's about culture, and it's you trying to navigate those abstract concepts and make some interesting observations on your own. All right, thank you guys. We'll see you next round. Take care. Have a good night.